In 1933, the United States government made it a crime for ordinary citizens to own gold, not just to trade it, not just to hoard it, to simply possess it. If you were caught with gold coins, bullion, or even gold certificates after the deadline, you could face a fine of $10,000, the equivalent of hundreds of thousands today, and up to 10 years in prison. Overnight, Americans were forced to turn in their most ancient store of wealth, exchanging it for paper dollars, because their government demanded it. Imagine being told that the money you trusted, the treasure you saved, the asset passed down through generations, was suddenly illegal for you to hold. This wasn't a scam run by criminals. It was written into law by the highest office in the land, and it changed the course of the financial system forever. To understand how something this extraordinary could happen, we need to step back into one of the darkest chapters of American economic history, the Great Depression. By 1933, the United States was broken. 1 in 4 Americans was out of work. Factories sat idle, banks were failing by the thousands, and ordinary people were losing everything. The banking system was collapsing because depositors were demanding gold. At that time, the dollar was backed by gold under the classical gold standard. Every paper dollar could, in theory, be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold, $20.67 per ounce. When confidence cracked, people rushed to withdraw actual gold, draining reserves and threatening to bring the entire financial system down. Enter Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Sworn in as president in March 1933, he faced an economy in free fall and a financial system on the brink of collapse. He needed a bold solution, something radical enough to stop the panic. That solution came less than a month later. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. The order made it illegal for private citizens to own most forms of gold. People had until the end of April to surrender their gold to the Federal Reserve or a member bank. In return, they would be paid in paper dollars at the fixed price of $20.67 per ounce. On paper, the government claimed this was necessary to stabilize the banking system, to prevent hoarding, and to give the Federal Reserve the ability to expand the money supply. In reality, it was one of the largest forced transfers of wealth in modern history. Americans dutifully lined up to hand over their coins, their bars, even family heirlooms, under threat of punishment. Some resisted, hiding gold in basements, burying it in fields, or melting it down into jewelry. But most complied, because the penalties were too severe to risk. Here's the part that stings. After collecting the gold, the government didn't just sit on it. In January 1934, less than a year later, the Gold Reserve Act revalued gold from $20.67 per ounce to $35. This single stroke devalued the dollar by 40%. The government had just confiscated gold from its citizens at the old price, only to immediately raise its official value. In other words, the people handed over their wealth and the government pocketed the instant profit. This wasn't a minor policy tweak. It was a deliberate reset of the rules of money. By seizing gold and devaluing the dollar, the Roosevelt administration gave itself the power to inflate the money supply far beyond what the gold standard had previously allowed. It allowed the government to spend more, borrow more, and launch the New Deal programs that would define the era. For the banks, it was salvation. The gold they now held through the Federal Reserve gave confidence back to the financial system. For the government, it was control. But for ordinary Americans, it was theft dressed up as law. Let's pause here to make this personal. Imagine your grandparents saving gold coins over a lifetime. Suddenly, the government declares them illegal, forces them to hand them over at a fixed price, then immediately revalues the gold higher. Your family loses, the government gains, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's not hypothetical. That's what happened to millions of Americans in 1933. The move was controversial even then. Lawsuits reached the Supreme Court in what became known as the Gold Clause cases. Many contracts at the time were written in gold clauses, promises to repay debts in gold rather than in paper currency, as a hedge against inflation. By seizing gold and devaluing the dollar, the government had effectively voided those contracts. Creditors sued, arguing that the government was trampling private agreements and confiscating property. In 1935, the Supreme Court narrowly upheld Roosevelt's actions by a single vote. The ruling set a chilling precedent. In times of crisis, the government could rewrite the rules of money, override private contracts, and seize wealth in the name of national interest. And here's the deeper truth. This wasn't just about saving banks. It was about breaking the gold standard itself. By taking control of gold and removing it from private hands, Roosevelt severed the most direct link between citizens and hard money. Paper dollars became the only legal currency, backed not by a promise of redemption, but by government decree. The financial system had entered a new era, one where trust in gold was replaced by trust in authority. So who really benefited from America's gold confiscation? The government, first and foremost. By seizing gold and then revaluing it, Washington instantly boosted the value of its reserves by billions of dollars. This wasn't small change. It gave Roosevelt the ability to finance ambitious New Deal programs, to expand public spending, and to stabilize the banking system without having to raise taxes dramatically in the middle of a depression. It was a masterstroke of financial engineering, and a blow to the principle of private property. The banks were next in line to benefit. By transferring citizens' gold into the vaults of the Federal Reserve, the government effectively guaranteed the stability of the banking sector. Confidence, once shattered by bank runs, could be restored. The public was told this was all in the name of saving the economy. But it's hard to ignore the reality. The very institutions that had failed ordinary depositors were bailed out at the expense of the people who had trusted them. And then there were the wealthy and politically connected, who found ways to bend the rules. Some managed to shift gold overseas before the order took effect. Others converted their wealth into assets exempt from confiscation, like certain collectible coins or jewelry. Ordinary citizens, meanwhile, had no such options. They complied, or they risked prison. The result was a transfer of wealth upward, away from households, and into the hands of the state and the elite. What about the losers? That part is obvious. Millions of Americans who had saved in gold, who believed they were holding something tangible, something safe, discovered that their safety net could vanish overnight. Their gold was taken, exchanged for paper dollars that immediately lost value when the dollar was devalued. Those who trusted the system most lost the most. And what they learned, painfully, was that the rules of money are not fixed. They can be rewritten in an instant with the stroke of a pen. Now fast forward to the present. Why should this matter to you today? Because the principle hasn't changed. When the system is threatened, governments will do whatever it takes to preserve it, even if that means stripping citizens of their wealth. In 1933, it was gold. In 2008, it was trillions in taxpayer-funded bailouts for banks deemed too big to fail. In 2013, Cyprus imposed bail-ins, seizing a portion of citizens' bank deposits to stabilize its financial system. In 2020, unprecedented money printing during the pandemic inflated asset prices while leaving wages struggling to keep up, eroding purchasing power for millions. And inflation itself is a form of confiscation. You may not see armed agents knocking on doors to seize your gold today, but every year that prices rise faster than wages, the same effect is achieved. Your savings buy less, your labor is worth less, and the system absorbs the difference. It is wealth transfer in slow motion, hidden in plain sight. That's the modern version of confiscation. Not through force, but through policy. The lesson from 1933 is stark. Don't assume your wealth is untouchable. Don't assume the system will play by its own rules. When pressure mounts, the rules will change. If the government once made gold illegal, what would stop it from freezing digital accounts, seizing pensions, or taxing assets in ways that strip wealth from savers today? The precedent has already been set. The only difference is the form it takes. This is why real wealth cannot be measured only in digits on a screen. True financial freedom requires assets and knowledge that stand outside the reach of sudden policy shifts. Skills that no government can confiscate. Hard assets that retain value even when paper promises collapse. Awareness of history, so that when the next emergency is declared, you recognize the patterns instead of being blindsided. When America stole its citizens' gold, it wasn't pitched as theft. It was framed as rescue, as patriotism, as sacrifice for the greater good. But the outcome was clear. The system survived, and the people paid. History doesn't repeat, but it whispers the same warning across generations. If they could take wealth once, they can take it again. And if you don't understand how money and power really operate, you'll always be the one left holding paper when the rules change. So the next time you hear a politician promise stability or a banker assure you that your money is safe, remember 1933. Remember that the rules of the financial system are not laws of nature, but decisions of power. And decisions of power can turn against you in an instant. Protect yourself not with blind faith, but with knowledge, awareness, and the pursuit of real wealth. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.